Hello and welcome back to Project R7. So on today's video, we're going to start talking about Woolwich and the process that we're using with Woolwich in order to tune our motorbike. Full transparency, this isn't an advertisement for Woolwich, it's just the company that we've used on the SV in the past and we decided to go with for the R7. We communicated with Woolwich themselves if they had any system or if they'd done anything in order to start developing something for the R7, and they replied that they hadn't, and we actually shipped our bike up to them so that they could start developing their product. In return, we got the full Woolwich kit and caboodle, race tools, the Zetronix kit. What do you get when you order from Woolwich? You'll get a bin file. You then need the hardware to start tuning your bike. Now you can take your bike to someone that has that hardware, a tuning shop or whatnot. They can then use that bin file that you've bought, plug all their hardware in, plug it into the bike and start tuning. Alternatively, you can get the tuning pack yourself, which includes the harness that connects the log box to your ECU, allowing you to do it yourself in conjunction with downloading a map or getting a map from someone else. Then from there, you can go so far as to start getting the Zetronix systems, which connects the log box to the exhaust. Ostensibly, you're getting an air fuel ratio. That way you can start tuning, like fine tuning the ECU, fine tuning your fuel mapping. And then finally, on top of that, for certain bikes, and now again, you're gonna have to double check, you can get the race tools package, which is pretty fun, pretty awesome. You end up getting a quick shifter, depending on the bike. That can be a quick shifter and auto blipper. Again, check the bike. You'll also get your pit lane limiter and your launch control, both of which are not necessarily always useful, but bloody awesome. You can install it yourself or you can pay someone to install it, and then you start tuning the bike and taking it out of the track for some fun. So with the race tools and the tuning package, depending on the type of bike that you've got and the style of ECU connection that it requires, you can actually have like a live tune. So it doesn't auto tune like some other companies do, like Power Commander, for example. What it will do is it'll sit there getting readings from the bike, from your Zetronix unit in the exhaust, and it'll write a map and suggest that map. You then though have to, once you pull back into the pits or come back from your little road ride, then choose to enter that map onto your ECU. So it's not an automatic thing that it automatically uploads as you're riding. It just sits there and writes it as you're riding, and then you're good to go. So that's what we've done on the Suzuki. We have both done it at the dyno. So we get a base map at the dyno and then take it to the track, and then at the track, different conditions, you know, you've got the ram air activating. We can then do a little bit of fine tuning at the track. You can also do live tune, so you can see live data from the motorcycle, engine revs, engine temperature, live air fuel ratio, so that, which is pretty cool. With certain bikes, it doesn't work the same as the Suzuki. The SV is pretty simple, so you can leave it on there at all times. Some bikes you can't do it anywhere else but on a dyno because it interferes with certain other parts of the ECU. With the R7, you can leave it on for a day of tuning, so you can take it to the track, get your maps updated at the track or on the road. But at the end of the day, you're going to need to remove the hardware, otherwise it's going to sit there and drain your battery up. We have moved across to the bike to start looking at what is needed to install some of the hardware for the Woolwich gear. Now, before you do anything, when it comes to electronics and especially anything to do with the ECU, it's a good idea to disconnect the negative off your battery. We have a nice Dynavolt lightweight lithium battery in ours, but you need to make sure you disconnect the negative. Now, if it's a road bike or even a race bike, you should take the seat off first to be able to gain access to your negative. Disconnect that and tie it out of the way so that you don't have any chance of accidentally closing the circuit off the battery and causing issues like blowing your ECU up or something like that. Starting to pop fuses, and that only creates confusion while starting to do some work. Next step, you need to find your ECU, which is located under the seat. So you'll have to, if you're using this on your road bike, you'll have to start disconnecting and pulling things off. So your rear seat, your front seat. You may need to move some bodywork. Unfortunately, because we've got the bike stripped, it's super easy for us, but we can't actually give you the step-by-steps on how to do it on your street bike. You'll also see that we actually already have the Woolwich harness installed. Woolwich left that on the bike after doing all the work for us. So we won't be doing a step-by-step on how to install the harness, but Woolwich's instructions are all pretty good, so you'll be able to see that once you get their instructions. Once you've located the ECU, you want to disconnect the ECU plug, which is this big unit here. There's a button in the middle, about here. So you push down on that. There should be a fairly positive feeling in your thumb when you hit it, and then this will pop off, and then your ECU plug comes away. Like so. You can see the location of all the pins, which we'll have to start unplugging a few of here. So first step after getting this plug off the ECU, you need to unlock the board. You can see this white structure here that actually locks all the pins in place. So it's just a case of making sure you get something nice and firm and in there. You can hear that real positive snap there. You can see it on this one. That unlocks it so that you can actually start pulling pins or pulling the plugs out. You can see the location for all your pins. Now, not all of them are used. Some of them have blanks, and some of those blank ports are actually what we're going to use to install the Woolwich. So what you'll need to end up doing is pulling out the plugs where we can see this Woolwich harness is going into. You'll remove those plugs. You're probably best off buying a ECU pin plugging tool, or using a bit of something very small and very pointy. When we first did this, we used the proper tool. You can also use something like a little bit of lock wire or safety wire that is going to be strong enough, but you have to be very careful with that. You don't want to bridge across pins, otherwise you might start doing damage. All right, so what we're going to show now is how to push these plugs out. Now this one isn't, the one that I'm about to show, isn't one that is used for the Woolwich harness. You can see ours is already connected, but it illustrates the same thing. So where in the Woolwich instructions, the picture that they show you is actually the back of the plug with every pin removed, and they're just demonstrating how to put this section into the plug. Don't confuse it thinking that it is going to be this side. In trying to make this video, we were a little bit confused ourselves, which is why we're mentioning it. The photo in the Woolwich instructions is actually this back section with all of the plugs removed, so that they can demonstrate which one it's going into. So hopefully that makes sense. Now we're going to demonstrate what it looks like when you actually push the pins out. So I've got my little bit of lock wire. Again, Woolwich suggests a paper clip that you can fold out. Now you can see here the pins starting to come out. You want to be careful because you don't want to lose the pins. And then you pull that pin out. Where that pin just came out of, you would then get the Woolwich harness and trace the pin back in. So you would have your section of paperclip, lock wire, whatever you've used. I can just see my bit of lock wire poking out there. You'd then follow that back through with the Woolwich pin. You need to read the instructions so you know which pin location it's going into. So when you are actually putting the Woolwich harness in, again, make sure you've got the block up the right way, but also the pin is oriented. You have to make sure you follow the instructions so that you have the pin. You don't want to have it upside down or the wrong way. That way it won't lock into the ECU the way it needs to. At the end, once you've put the Woolwich harness in, you need to make sure you relock this. Again, applying a bit of force to it. And that snap to make sure that things don't start pulling out over time. Also with that, this plug won't go back on if it's still unlocked, so make sure you've put it all back on. Otherwise you might sit there arguing with the ECU for the rest of the day. So make sure you follow that step. You unlock it at the start so that you can do all of your unpinning for the harness. And then once you've got the new harness in, everything's connected, lock it back up. Otherwise you'll have difficulty hooking it back to the ECU. Next thing you'll need to do is you'll need to find your Yamaha diagnostics plug. Again, that's found usually under the seat, somewhere tucked up near the ECU. Push down, you pop the blank off. Now that, again, this is the Yamaha dealer plug, so they plug in, do their diagnostics, that sort of thing. That's just your blanking plug. And then you have the red plug comes with the Woolwich kit. Put them together and your Woolwich harness is now connected to the Yamaha harness. Now that you have repinned your ECU plug, you're going to get your logbox, and this is your logbox which your SD card goes into. This is the other end of that harness, which is connected into down here. Now make sure you have it the right way around. It's oriented that way. Again, you have a nice solid little click and you're good to go. You will need to make space or find space for placing your log box. Try to get it somewhere where it's nice and secure. Foam padding or something like that that can stick it to the ECU or be somewhere where you can have it protected is a good idea, because over time things can become brittle, especially if it's a race bike and you crash it. You want it to be somewhere where it's not going to go flying out. Just a quick note, once you've done everything required with the ECU and the harness, make sure you reconnect your negative terminal to your battery. Otherwise you put it all back together and it won't start and you'll be quite upset. So just a quick reminder, seems silly, everyone's done it before. Make sure you put your battery back together properly. Next step is to start attaching your Zetronix gear. First thing you want to do with that, if you're going to start doing that, is go into the Woolwich software, turn the stock O2 sensor off in the ECU using the Woolwich software. Then you want to find the stock O2 sensor on your exhaust. Now for the R7 and the MT7, it is located down the front of the bike, just under the radiator on rider's right hand side. So you'll unscrew that from the standard exhaust, trace that all the way back, and you'll come up to under the frame plate on the right hand side of the bike. You'll have a bunch of wiring. Now some of this is the race tools, the Woolwich race tools, which is already on the bike, but this plug remains the standard Zetronix power supply, which is the O2 sensor, the stock O2 sensor. Our one's got a green clip, if that helps you identify what it is. So you disconnect the harness, the standard harness from it. Standard O2 sensor is now completely disconnected. You then get the Zetronix kit. So you've got your kit harness for the Zetronix. This plug is what goes into the standard R7 wiring loom, and bang, you have power for your Zetronix harness, which then goes up the back. The reason you put it up under the back, you find somewhere to place it all where it's nice and secure. This second plug here connects to this plug here, but that is part of the race tools, which we'll come to later. Moving back up to the top of the bike, we've plugged the Zetronix power cable in. We bring that up. That's what the top end of it looks like. It's only a small little 4-pin. You then have our Zetronix box, which this plugs into. So we're going to plug that into the side. Make sure it's oriented the correct way. Again, it's all very, very user-friendly stuff. Pretty simple to figure out. So that's your Zetronix box. Now you're going to need the cable which connects this box to your Woolwich logging box. So it's just your simple data transfer cable. Now for the demonstration here, we're just going to have these fairly easily put together. Now you've connected your Zetronix kit to your log box, so the data coming from the Zetronix is going to get into there. You're then going to get this cable here. There's this on one end and this on the other. So this data end is going to go into the Zetronix box. Again, pretty user-friendly, getting it all plugged in. So you should have 3 wires going into the Zetronix box. One is your power supply cable, then your data cable that goes to your log box, and then this cable goes down to your O2 sensor, which I'll bring up shortly. So this is the other end of that cable that goes down to your O2 sensor, which has this corresponding plug. Snap those two together. Nice positive click so you know that it's on properly. And then we have our O2 sensor. Now this is a used O2 sensor. A couple of things that we need to mention is we wouldn't recommend leaving the O2 sensor or the Zetronix unit on the bike the whole time. You can even remove the log box as well, because over time heat will damage these sensors. We've gone through 2 of them. On the SV650, we left them on to continuously log because we were constantly changing things. So you can see They're not gummed up, it's just they've become overheated and the sensor will fail. So do your runs, do what you need to do, whether it's on the dyno or on the track. Once you're happy with the map, disconnect it so it's not constantly on the bike, or you may end up damaging the sensor. So we spoke just before about the location of the OEM O2 sensor in the exhaust. It's up the front of the bike here. You can see this is the stock O2 sensor with your harness that goes back, which we traced through before. So you'll need to disconnect that. When it comes to the Zectronics, you have your O2 sensor. So depending on what exhaust you're going to be running, you'll need the wideband sensor. This one, the Zectronics, will not fit onto the standard exhaust. It is a smaller thread. It's a different type of sensor. For us, we're using the Akrapovic Racerline exhaust, which has a bung mounted into the system already. So you just screw this in, you're good to go. Depending on your exhaust system, you may or may not have the appropriate bung on it. If you don't, you will need to get a bung welded onto it. Fairly simple, you know, most shops are able to do it. Most tuning shops will have some function, or they'll know someone that will be able to do it for you. So once you have the Zectronics and everything fully loaded to the bike, you then move on to the race tools. So with the race tools, you get a quick shifter, which is this little unit here. With the R7, because it is still a cable throttle, you don't get the auto blip. It's only the quick shifter for going up the gears. You don't get the auto blip for going down. So when you order this part of the kit from Willich itself, Willich will generally assume you've got the standard rear sets on, so they'll give you the standard length shift rod that's required, which is slightly different to the stock one. The stock one is a rod, just a standard solid piece of rod that has threading at either end. With this version, you get a nice aluminium bar that has thread in either end that replicates the standard rod, but it's a much lighter unit like that, and it's quite a lot stronger for racing as well and for using the quick shifter. You then have your quick shift sensor. So what this does, if you don't know what a quick shifter does, this connects into your wiring harness. Depending on the type of quick shifter you get, it'll either be a power cut through the ignition or a fueling cut. When you're shifting up through the gears, depending on which setting you've got it in, if it's a standard, it's going to be a push. It'll push the button together and it will kill the ignition to the bike so that the engine slows down, your gearbox, everything matches up, so you get a nice, all but seamless shift as you're powering onto the gear. So you don't need to pull the clutch in, you're just sitting there winding the throttle on, kick the lever, and it'll change gear nice and easily for you. With these quick shifters from Willich, they are a bi-directional insofar as you can have it in road shift, just plug it on and tell the ECU which way you need to work, so whether it's a pull or a push. Now that's going to change for a variety of bikes and a variety of rear set styles, so you will have to make sure which one you need when you're putting it on. And also if you're going to run it in street pattern, so your normal 1 down 5 up, or reverse or GP shift, race shift, depending on what part of the world you're from, where you flip this unit over and first is up and the rest of the gears you kick down for. So your install is put this unit onto your shift knuckle, put your shift rod in. There's a variety of videos on the internet on how to adjust your shift rod to get the correct length for your foot, for your lever. So I'll leave that up to you to go and do a bit of Googling. Just be mindful that the little bits of bar that you get, the threaded rods that you get that go into the shift rod, they can bend easily if you don't being careful, so just be mindful of that. Once you've got it all plugged in, it's all set up, you then have to start thinking about where you're going to put the wiring harness. So for us, we get the loom, we've run it across the back here, we will cable tie or zip tie that bit of wiring to this knuckle, that way it doesn't float through. Now thankfully, compared to say the Suzuki SV650, the shift arm being so high up here means that it's going to be away from a lot of damage. A lot of bikes actually have that shift arm down quite low, meaning it's out in the breeze in the event of a fall. So it's pretty good having this up here like this. You're then going to need to route your wire, which will then go through across to the other side of the bike where it'll plug into the Race Tools loom. And we're going to pop across to the other side of the bike now and we'll show you that. Okay, so we've jumped across to the other side of the bike. You can see here we've routed our harness from the quick shifter around. This is your quick shifter module. This adjusts the sensitivity for the actual sensor on the other side, depending on how hard or soft you want it to be set, so that if your foot touches it, it's not going to cut accidentally, or whether how firmly or not you have to push it. It also adjusts your direction, so whether you're going to have it in GP shift or not. And again, depending on what resets you're using, so you'll have to figure that out when you get your setup. Quick shifter plugs in here. You trace this harness around, and remember we spoke about these plugs earlier. This is the quick shifter plug from the quick shifter harness that goes onto the back of the Race Tools harness here, just like so. We also have this plug over here, which you might see. This is an add-on harness that you can buy, and that is for your pit lane limiter. So connected to this is the pit lane limiter button, which you can route somewhere up to the front to put it on your handlebar. So once you've installed the quick shifter and Race Tools harness, you need to configure the quick shifter hardware itself. So you hold down both buttons, these two orange buttons on the module itself. While still holding down both buttons, you turn the ignition on, so you turn the key on, depending if you still have a key, whatever. You turn the ignition onto the bike, the power. The LEDs will flash up. So in quotes, it'll flash up. While still holding both buttons, you apply pressure to the gear lever on the other side of the bike to change direction. So if the bike is in second gear, you apply pressure in the direction of third gear, and you hold that pressure for approximately 5 seconds, then release the buttons. So you then release these two buttons. So the final step, the quick shifter should now be configured in the correct up shift direction, depending on which way your second to third gear pattern was, whether it was GP, road shift, depending on your reset. So you need to make sure you understand which way yours is going to be shifting. You can test the activation by applying pressure to the gear shift lever. A small dot on the quick shifter LED here will light up. With the pressure applied, initiates a shift. So there is a little LED that'll pop up on there that'll kind of give you a bit of a hint that it's working. So first we'll open up the Woolwich Racing Tune software. Click New and select your bike from the list. This will then give you the menu for your bike within Woolwich Racing Tune. So you can then start playing around with fuel maps and ignition maps, and depending on the bike that you've got and the sensors and whatever development Woolwich has done, you can start playing around with other things as well. So you can see the limiters tab. With that limiters tab, you can click that, and that will allow us on the R7, the only adjustment that you can do at the only limiter is the rev limit. Now for us, we're not going to play around with the rev limit. Other bikes, you can remove other restrictions depending on what's in them. On the stock ECU with the R7, it is just rev limit. In advanced settings is where you can turn off your stock O2 sensor. You can also turn off the fuel cut when decelerating. So while in advanced settings, you can also, depending on the ECU, depending on what part of the world you're in, if your bike has an immobilizer, you will have to disable that by turning it into US mode if you plan on running the bike keyless. Now, if it's going to be your road bike, I wouldn't recommend having the bike set up as keyless. If it's going to be a race bike, that makes life a whole lot easier. But in order to have it run in keyless function, you have to run it in the ECU mode for the US because it turns off the immobilizer. Lastly, in Race Tools, so you have your quick shifter controls in here. That's where you enable the quick shifter once you've physically installed the hardware. It also allows you to adjust the cut time or the kill time on the quick shifter, and what that allows for is, depending on gear and whatnot, and how the bike likes to change gear, you can adjust it to make sure that you're not putting undue force through the gearbox, and you'll have it matching up a lot nicer. You can also enable or disable, depending on what you want to do, the Woolwich launch control in the system as well. Even if you don't purchase Race Tools, you can actually purchase the launch control function separately. It's just unlocking it within the Woolwich Tune itself. There's a few things that you can change with the launch control. That's the launch control delay, so how long you have to be sitting still in first gear before launch control will turn itself on in the ECU. The RPM that you want to launch at, or you want it to be restricted at when you're doing your launch. And then the release speed, so when that limiter actually comes off, you can set that to whatever speed, whether it's 1 kilometer an hour or 1 mile an hour, up to 60, it doesn't matter. So you can set up your pit lane limiter as well, depending on your gearing. What RPM is going to be whatever speed limit your pit lanes are. So in Australia, most of them are 40 kilometers an hour. So depending on gearing we are running, we'd actually have to practice that and set at the correct RPM. So when you are finished, you've got everything set up how you want it, you need to write to the ECU. So on that main tab, you'll see the function button, Write ECU. You click on that, now you will get a few prompts that you have to work through. Follow those prompts and then the bike will start writing. Make sure when you are writing the ECU, you don't have someone accidentally bump the ignition, knock any of the wiring. You just want to push the button, click OK, and then hands off, stand back and wait for it to finish. And that completes our little tutorial on the Woolwich that we're running on our R7. Once again, big thanks to Woolwich for the assist with the R7 build with all of the tuning equipment that we have. It's pretty cool that our bike is actually the bike that's in the photos in the manual. We set the bike up and they use that to start the initial development. Now they have processed and continued on. They're continuously developing, but it's cool that we were the first bikes that they used. And most importantly, thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this kind of content. If you do, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. That helps us know what we need to do in order to keep you as the viewer happy. Moving on from here, the next video should hopefully be the bike having been back on the dyno with a few changes, so stick around for that. It should be exciting. Once again, thanks for watching. See you at the next one. The quick difference. Chicago.